All right, strap in everyone, because today we're diving headfirst into a story that could shake things up in a big way. We're talking about Trump and his latest move, nominating Kash Patel to be the head honcho of the FBI.
Yeah, definitely a controversial pick, to say the least. And you know what? The impact of this could be huge, even for people who aren't glued to the news every day.
You're absolutely right. I mean, the FBI is involved in pretty much everything, right?
Yeah, everything.
We're talking terrorism, cybercrime, public corruption, things that touch all of our lives.
Absolutely, every single one of us.
So to get the full picture, we've got a whole stack of articles here. Fox News, the New York Post, the Atlantic, Dot Now, all weighing in on this nomination. Our goal, we'll break it all down for you and then get to the big question. What does this potential FBI shakeup actually mean for you, the listener?
That's what we're here to find out.
So let's start with the man of the hour, Kash Patel. This guy's background is like something out of a movie. Started as a public defender, then switched sides and became a federal prosecutor going after terrorism cases.
And that's not all. He was a key player in the House investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election, working directly with Devin Nunes. And of course, we can't forget about his various national security roles in the Trump administration.
So we're talking legal experience, national security experience, a pretty unique combo for someone who might end up leading the FBI.
It really makes you wonder, is that kind of background a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to running the FBI? Something to think about as we go deeper.
Now, one thing that pops up over and over in these articles is this label, staunch Trump loyalist, that seems to follow Patel everywhere. Fox News even quotes him saying he wants to turn FBI headquarters into, and I quote, a museum of the deep state.
Whoa, okay, that's a pretty loaded statement.
Right.
Yeah, that whole deep state concept is all about this idea that there's like a secret network within the government working against the will of the people. It's pretty controversial.
Yeah, some people see it as a way to just discredit institutions and individuals who are seen as, opposing a certain agenda.
Exactly.
And Patel, he's not shying away from that viewpoint at all. In his book, Government Gangsters, he basically paints the FBI as this organization that's full of corruption and political bias.
It's interesting because this view clashes directly with what the FBI says about itself. They emphasize their commitment to protecting the American people. So we've got these two totally opposing perspectives.
Yeah. So on one side, we've got Patel, who sees the FBI as this, den of corruption.
Right.
And then on the other side, we've got the FBI portraying itself as a protector of the people.
And this difference in how they see things, that's super important to understanding what might happen if Patel actually takes charge.
So let's talk about that. What's the end game here? What do you think Trump is hoping to accomplish by putting forward someone with such strong opinions?
Well, the New York Post article talks about Trump's desire to, and I'm quoting here, reform the FBI and bring back what he calls fidelity, bravery, and integrity. But there's probably more to it than that.
Okay, so what's lurking beneath the surface? What else is going on here?
Well, you can't just ignore the history. Trump's relationship with the FBI has been rocky for a while, especially after that whole Mar-a-Lago raid.
Right.
So this nomination could be seen as a power move, an attempt to control an agency he views with suspicion, maybe even as an enemy.
Interesting. So potentially less about reform and more about grabbing the reins.
Yeah, consolidating power. It's something we've seen before with some of his other appointments, right? Surrounding himself with people who are loyal to him, tightening his grip on important institutions.
Makes you wonder how that could play out for the FBI. And for all of us, really.
Big questions for sure.
Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of those potential consequences. The New York Post also has this quote from Andrew McCabe, the former FBI deputy director, and it's a doozy.
Yeah.
He says, no part of the FBI's mission is safe with Kash Patel in any position of leadership.
Whoa, that's a pretty serious warning.
Yeah.
And it shows just how worried people are, both inside the FBI and outside.
I mean, what happens if Patel comes in and decides to change everything based on his own personal view of how things should be?
It's a question a lot of people are asking. And that's something we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
So we know that Kash Patel's got some strong opinions, to put it mildly.
Okay.
And this whole nomination thing is causing a lot of buzz. But what does it actually mean for you and me?
Yeah.
For regular people?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? Let's think about this for a second. The FBI is involved in investigations that directly affect our lives. Terrorism, cybercrime, even public corruption cases that can hit close to home.
Right. Remember a few years back, there was that huge data breach. Millions of people were affected. All their personal information got out there.
Oh, yeah, that was a big one. And the FBI, they played a huge role in that investigation. tracking down the bad guys, trying to limit the damage.
Right.
So now imagine if the FBI becomes less effective, less trustworthy, or even worse, starts playing politics.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're getting at. If the FBI isn't doing its job, all those threats become even more dangerous. Things like identity theft, that happens to so many people.
Right.
The FBI is right there on the front lines, investigating those cases, going after those criminal networks.
Absolutely.
So does that mean that if the FBI is weakened or distracted by all this internal drama, those criminals have more room to maneuver?
It's a real possibility, unfortunately, and we haven't even touched on counterterrorism efforts. A less effective FBI could mean we're all more vulnerable to those kinds of threats, too.
Okay, this is starting to get a little scary. It sounds like this Patel nomination, it could have a domino effect starting within the FBI, but then spreading outward, impacting all of us.
It's a legitimate concern for sure. We've seen this kind of thing happen in other organizations too. When there's a leadership change, especially one where the new person has a totally different vision, it can cause a lot of friction. Morale goes down, and in the end, the organization just doesn't work as well as it used to.
And we're not talking about just any organization here. We're talking about the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
the agency that's supposed to protect us from some of the most serious threats out there.
Exactly. And the potential problems go way beyond just how the FBI operates day to day. Remember, Patel's been pretty vocal about his criticisms of certain FBI investigations, especially those that involve Trump and his allies.
So are you saying there's a concern that if he's in charge, the FBI might start picking and choosing which investigations to prioritize, focusing on cases that fit a certain political agenda instead of what's really best for the public?
That's exactly what a lot of people are worried about. It raises questions about whether the FBI can stay independent and impartial, which, let's be honest, is super important for people to trust them.
So far, it sounds like a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
Is there anything positive about this nomination? Anything at all?
Well, some people argue that Patel's outsider perspective and his willingness to shake things up could actually be a good thing for the FBI. They point to his background as a prosecutor, his experience in national security, and say that those could be valuable assets.
So maybe he brings some fresh ideas, new energy to the agency?
Yeah, it's possible. He's definitely not afraid to challenge the status quo, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And that could lead to positive changes. But the big question is, does his vision for the FBI actually match up with the agency's core mission and values?
Yes.
And can he actually lead an organization that might be totally resistant to his whole approach?
Sounds like a pretty risky gamble.
Yeah, you could say that. And the outcome, well, it'll depend in part on another player in this whole game, the Senate.
Right. They have to confirm his nomination.
Exactly.
And the Atlantic article pointed out that right now it's the Republicans who control the Senate.
Yeah.
So do they just give Patel the green light? Or do they push back against Trump's choice?
That's the big unknown right now. And actually, some Republican senators have already voiced concerns about Patel, which suggests there might be some pushback even within the party.
So you're saying there's still a chance this nomination could be stopped?
It's definitely possible. The Senate confirmation hearings, that's going to be the main battleground here. And the outcome of that fight, it's going to have a huge impact on the future of the FBI.
Okay, so we've talked about the possible fallout of this nomination for the FBI for national security, even for regular people like us. But there's one more question I keep coming back to. What if Patel actually does get confirmed? How would he even approach the job?
Now, that's where things get really interesting. If we want to understand what Patel might do as FBI director, we need to dig deeper into his worldview.
Oh.
What are his core beliefs? And how might those beliefs translate into actual changes in policy?
Right, so we've talked about what might happen if Patel gets this job, but to really get a sense of what his leadership would look like, we need to understand how he thinks.
Right. And luckily for us, he's laid out a lot of his thinking in his book, Government Gangsters.
That's right. The book has definitely been stirring up controversy, but is there any truth to what he's saying? Or is it just a bunch of conspiracy theories?
Well, Patel throws out a lot of information. Some of it is pretty detailed. He names names, talks about specific cases, and makes some strong accusations.
So does his book hold up? Is there evidence to back up his claims?
That's the thing. Some of his claims have been challenged, but others haven't been fully investigated.
So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's up to each reader to decide how much they buy into his arguments.
Okay, so let's just say for a second that Patel actually does become the FBI director. How might this worldview that he lays out in Government Gangsters, how might that translate into actual changes at the FBI?
Well, if we use the book as a roadmap, I think we'd see a pretty dramatic shift in priorities. Remember, Patel has been extremely critical of those investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election. He calls them a witch hunt.
So are you saying those investigations might be scaled back or even shut down completely?
It's definitely a possibility. He could also decide to redirect resources to investigate what he sees as the real threat, the so-called deep state.
Okay, but what would that even look like? Would the FBI be investigating its own employees, other government agencies?
It's tough to say for sure, but yeah, it could get pretty messy. Imagine an FBI that's more concerned with internal enemies than external threats. That could seriously impact their ability to do their main job, protecting the country from terrorism, cybercrime, and all the other dangers out there.
It sounds like we'd be in uncharted territory. I mean, the FBI's always had its share of critics, but this feels different.
It definitely does. Patel represents a much more radical change from how things have always been done. His views are so closely tied to Trump's own issues with the FBI,
Right.
and that's a recipe for, well, for a very volatile situation.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute and look at the bigger picture. We've been talking about what this nomination could mean for the FBI, for national security, and for everyday people. But what does this whole saga say about where we are as a country, about American politics today?
You hit the nail on the head. This fight over Patel's nomination, it's like a miniature version of all the bigger political battles we're seeing right now. It's about power, it's about trust, and it's about what happens to our institutions.
And what's at stake here goes way beyond just one guy and one government agency.
Oh, absolutely. This gets to the heart of our democracy.
Right.
The rule of law, the balance of power, the decisions that get made in the next few weeks and months, they'll have consequences for years to come.
So where do we go from here? What should people be watching for as this story unfolds?
Well, keep a close eye on the Senate confirmation hearings. That's where the main fight's going to happen. Pay attention to what people are saying, the questions they're asking, and of course, how they vote. It's a chance to see our elected officials wrestle with these complicated issues in real time.
And aside from all the political drama, what can regular people do? How can they make their voices heard?
The most important thing is to stay informed. Have conversations about these issues with people you know, and hold your elected officials accountable for their decisions.
Right.
This isn't something you can just sit back and watch. The future of the FBI, and honestly, the security and freedom of our country, depends on having citizens who are engaged and informed.
Well, there you have it, folks. We've taken a deep dive into the nomination of Kash Patel and explored what it might mean for the FBI, for American democracy, and for all of us. It's a lot to take in, but remember, this is just the beginning.
The fight over this nomination is far from over. Nobody knows for sure how it's going to end, but one thing is clear, a lot is riding on this. So stay tuned, stay involved, and keep asking those tough questions.